Yeah, we're off. Hi, guys. A bit late today. I had to wait for the window cleaner to finish.
Assets.
Hi, Diane. Just waiting for my tablet to come on. I went late because I had to wait for the window cleaner to clean the windows. So that's why I was a bit late. Let's take this back to the beginning.
Concerning the economically unstable times that we live in, it is a great idea to convert some of your savings into real money. Now, there is a big difference between real money and what we call money, which is actually just currency. So our dollar is currency, which fluctuates. Real money, on the other hand, like silver, for example, is a store of value over time. The best way to think of it is like this. If you had saved $1,000 in cash back in the late 60s, the late 1960s, that $1,000 would still be $1,000 technically, but it would buy you significantly less today due to inflation. Now, if you had saved that same $1,000 in silver back in the 1960s, today it would be worth around $28,000. So one of the best ways to protect your purchasing power is in real money, more specifically, silver. You can buy and have the metal shipped discreetly to your door. And what most people don't know is that you can actually convert your IRA or even a 401k into physical silver rather than having all of your life savings tied up in the paper fiat system, which is subject to hyperinflation. Go to dailyrenegade.com and click on
Hey, Phil, good to see you, bro.
Assets Metals banner. This is the only company that I personally trust with this kind of thing. Click on that and sign up to get your free silver report today. One of the financial experts will speak with you to find out the best way to protect your savings going forward in these uncertain times. Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Josh Peck. Tonight we have a very special episode for you. We are welcoming back to the show, finally, Gary Wayne, author of The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Plan to Enslave Humankind, and The Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, How Understanding Prehistory and Giants Helps Define End-Time Prophecy. And that second book will be the topic of tonight's show. Glad to have you back, Gary. How are you doing?
Doing well and staying very busy and very happy to be back on
Okay, this is only 11 days old.
your show and to talk about my new books. So, yeah, very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. And I've been looking forward to this book for years, and I know a lot of people have. You put so much work into the first one, and even though it's a large book, it's still easy to read and understand. So it's not intimidating. Like the chapters are short enough where you could read 2 or 3 chapters in one sitting pretty easily. Can you give us a brief overview of this new book and how it differs from the first one?
Yeah, it's interesting because, I said I would never write a sequel to the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. In fact, I'm 300 pages into another book. And I set that aside because of all the feedback I was getting for, from Christians who are saying, we really like the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, but we would like to have an author who can go really deep into the Bible. And talk about
Diane, Paul Begley's doing that live right now, the 10 aliens.
About similar things, but specifically targeted at Christians because, as you know, most churches don't teach prehistory, they don't teach prophecy, so they're not getting the whole context. And one of the things that people really liked about the first book is they said, it gave me a worldview that I didn't know about before, or as much about as I should have, and it also made the Old Testament come to life. So I didn't want to be redundant. So I had no real interest in writing more what I thought might be about the same topic, but it's the audience that convinced me. So as unique as the first book is, book 2 is just as unique and in different ways. And whereas in the first book, I let the spurious forces or the evil forces speak for themselves. And I'm drawing from all sorts of outside sources. This book only draws from sources outside the Bible that really sort of supports the important aspects of the Bible. And so it's targeted at Christians. And so this book goes deeper than any other book into the Bible. And it goes deeper in a way that will help. It won't reimagine the Bible. It will make sense of the Bible, I think, in a lot of ways for people. So it goes very, very deep into everything it says about the giants, the demons, the hybrid races, the angelic order, the rebellious angelic order, and how all of that is explained through the Old Testament that provides language for understanding end-time prophecy. And then I'll transition from that with all of that information and then review all of the wars of the giants in the Old Testament and make sense out of that in a way that people haven't really seen it before. They get a glimpse of it in the first book, but not like in the second book. And then in the last half of the book, I take those terms in that context and I lay down a end-time biblical chronology using that context so that people can fit prophecy into place. And it's like I said, it's very, very unique, and it's targeted at Christians, and it's going to make people think, whether it's from prehistory or in prophecy, to maybe have another look at the Bible has to say.
Fantastic, man! That sounds absolutely awesome. I want to get right into it. You open the book with the days of Noah and the giants of old. What can you tell us about the giants, and why are the days of Noah such an important time in history?
Yeah, it's one of those references that shows up in the signs that Jesus provides for his second coming and the end time events. So it shows up in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and you get references and details on that in Luke 17 and 21, with Luke adding the days of Lot as part of that whole allegory for understanding the end time. Now, what's interesting about the word days of Noah is it's the exact same words that that the Bible uses to describe in Genesis 9:29. And Noah lived 600 years before the flood and 350 years after the flood. And the days of Noah is an overarching sign. It's part of 3 overarching signs of the end times that Jesus provides, and it immediately follows the fig tree generation. So there's a specific generation where all of those events that he discusses are going to be fulfilled. Heaven and earth will pass away, but his words will never pass away. And the other overarching sign is the birth sorrows and how that affects the end time. So all 3 are that overarching context for the events described in the fig tree generation. And so if we look at the days of Lot, it talks about a godless nation, which was at the time of the flood. It talks about, you can make an inference to people carrying on and not carrying, thinking that the flood was coming, and there's violence. And of course, in Genesis 6:1 through 4, you get the introduction of the giants as the preamble to the flood story, and the context for that violence. And that we're guided to learn about the days of Noah and all of the days of Noah. And there's giants both before and after the flood. And that it is somehow connected in the allegories to what happened in the time of the flood and the time of Sodom and Gomorrah, that is going to be akin to what's going to happen in the end time. So that old adage that the Bible talks about, the book of Ecclesiastes, where you have nothing is new under the sun, what was will be again, is something that we need to understand in context of what Jesus is providing us. So it's a specific sign. And, the first book, I make a pretty good case for a technology and a society that was advanced and perhaps more advanced than what we have today, that we're just catching up to be like the days of Noah. So we need to understand everything that was going on.
Okay, so why couldn't the giants have survived on a submarine? They had the technology. Why didn't they survive on a submarine?
Both before the flood and immediately after the flood, and how that is going to affect us in the end times. So we have giants that show up after the flood, and they're understood as the Rephaim giant versus the Nephilim giant. So I'm going to make a distinction right out of the gate between the difference between Rephaim and Nephilim, and talk about the post-Diluvian giants, which are the Rephaim. You know, Nephilim only shows up 3 times in the Old Testament in Hebrew, and that's once in Genesis 6:4 and 2 times in Numbers 13:33. And in 13:33, that's the embellished part of the report that the terrified spies or scouts are trying to terrify Israel for not going into the land of the giants and taking the land of the covenant. And they actually succeed, but these aren't Nephilim. Even though it says the Anak are the children of giants, and it says that sort of twice, and that word goes back to Nephilim.
Hang on, Dog, I'll let you out.
The Anakim were not Nephilim, and they were giants, but not Nephilim. And we know that there were Anakim in the covenant land, because earlier on in the report with Joshua and Caleb, and then again repeated in Deuteronomy 1, we get that testimony that you have these 3 Anakim kings, Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. And in Deuteronomy 2, we see a description of these giants in that period of time, like the Emim, like the Zamzuzim, like the Horim, and the Anakim are listed as giants, but that's the Hebrew word Rapha, 7495, or 7497, rooted in 7495. And so we get Rephaim used 25 times in the Old Testament versus 3 times. The only other time giant is used is in the book of Job, and it goes back to the Hebrew word Gibor, or Giborim, which is the word for mighty one used to describe the Nephilim in Genesis 6:4. And we get Rephaim used 2 times in the Old Testament, translated into English directly as the Rephaim in Genesis 14 in the War of Giants, and then in the Mighty 10 that's talked about in Genesis 15 in the land being promised to Abraham by God. And then the other times where you have Rephaim that comes out of the Hebrew, or Rephaim being the male plural, it's translated as giants. So the Old Testament is talking about giants in terms of Rephaim and not Nephilim, but what the Numbers 13:33 passage says, describing Anakim as the Nephilim does, it tells you the veracity and the fear that the Israel had for the antediluvian existence of these giants, that they would use them to terrify the Israelites what they were going up against. So this is a story in book 2 about the Rephaim giants, the beast empires that they're going to create, and how that's affected our history and how that's going to affect it in time.
Yeah, that's an important distinction to make between those 3 words, Nephilim, Giborim, and Rephaim. And another 3 words that you bring up in the book too, that many people might not know, the differences here are demons, devils, and unclean spirits. What are the differences between these things?
Yeah, that's interesting, because you have those 3 terms that are used interchangeably in the New Testament in the accounts that Jesus is describing on his encounters of what we sort of commonly understand as demons. And so, you know, you have like an evil spirit and an unclean spirit. You could look at that as being a demonic spirit, or you could look at that as being a fallen angelic spirit, or maybe some sort of other counterfeit spirit that's created. But because they're used in conjunction, and you have the translation in the King James Bible as devil, it gets a little bit confusing. And that word devil doesn't go back to diablos in Greek as what it does when it's being applied to Satan. It goes back to daemon, the root word for demon spirit. So these are demon spirits that are possessing people and hurting people that Jesus is exorcising. And Legion would be the most famous of that. But we don't really get a significant explanation for who these demon spirits are that Jesus is dealing with, that seem to be inferior spirits to fallen Nephilim, or the fallen ones, fallen angelic spirits, and Satan, Diabolos. And that when you look at the definition for Diabolos, you have Satan described as being that individual, just as part of his name in Revelation 12 as a serpent and dragon. And he's the prince of the demons. So somewhere the demons fit into this hierarchical order, only of the spurious ones, only of the fallen ones. And these are the visible ones that when we're talking about the demon spirits, at least they once were visible, that were doing things on earth for the fallen ones. And so when we look at who these demons are, they appear to be, and I make a good case for that, these are the disembodied spirits of the counterfeit spirit created by fallen angels that went into the giant's physical body and soul of the physical world, and then merged with this counterfeit spirit. Just as the Bible tells us, there's three aspects to our body, and it has an oikater in the soul and the body from the physical world, and then the spirit that comes from heaven. And then when we sleep, that spirit goes back to heaven. And my understanding from all the wording in the Bible is that spirit, that's different than soul sleep. Soul is an expression by polytheists of the physical world because they don't want to recognize where the true spirit comes from. And so, yeah, these are beings that we need to understand what they're doing today in preparing for the end time, how they're going to affect the end time, but we also need to understand where they came from and how they got to be there. So in the book, I'm going to talk about beheading and decapitation. And just as Goliath had his head taken after he was killed with the smooth stone, that seems to be the only way to ensure the giants are going to stay dead. And in the execration texts of Egypt, the worst death a royale could have is a beheading. And there's numerous cases in secular history and within the Bible of beheadings of people because they're afraid that they may come back to life. In fact, in the time of Jesus, in the time of Herod, the Tetrarch, and John the Baptist, he ensures, Herod does, that John's head is taken. But you can imagine then with this understanding of what the polytheists understood about giants and disembodied spirits and them coming back, when he hears the miracles of Jesus going on in the Galilee Valley, he's terrified. He thinks it's John the Baptist, and that somehow he was able to repair himself or resurrect, and he's absolutely mortified that this could be the case. And so this beheading is something that I'm going to cover off in a significant way so that people understand why that's part of the giant mythology and other occult genre. But this was an understanding that the giants had the ability to reproduce, or not reproduce, but to repair themselves. And that comes from the root word 7495. And that means to heal. And it's Rapha as well. And it is the root word for 7497 for giant. And it's also the root word for 7496, meaning evil spirit, shade, shed, demons.
The seventh party has come to the home of rugby.
Demon spirit, all words like that, which are the disembodied spirits of the giants once they've been slain or their body has died. And 7495 means that there's something in a connection either as with medicine, a technology, or somehow an ability to heal, because all of these words are reflecting the partial meaning to understanding the Rephaim giants. And the Nephilim would have had more gifts, I think. I think that post-Diluvian giants are smaller and they have less gifts passed on. And so 7495 provides an insight into books like, are you still there? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, you just froze up was all. So, and so it's okay. And in the Ugaritic text, which is written in Old Semitic, the root language for Hebrew, we get the Raphaim accounts. The RPM, as it would be in Old Semitic, Rapiu or Rapium, as it's transliterated into English out of the Ugaritic text, are created by the Balim after the flood. So now you're into the Ugaritic parallel story for the creation of the giants that show up in the flood after the flood, and that they're doing rituals to Baal and Ashtaroth to come back because they have an issue. They have a fertility issue. And they're doing fertility rituals to create more Rephaim, but of course they can't come back because just as their parent gods, like El before the flood, who created giants, doing the same crimes would send them to the abyss prison or the pit prison as well. So they're no longer walking amongst humans, but they're looking in the assembly of the Balim or the assembly of the Dat Tanu, the Tuatha De Danann, the Dedan, the tribe of Danu. They've got a whole bunch of different names. I cover off all of those names in the book. So this is the assembly of the Tanu, and this is an assembly of the giants, but the Rephaim are part of. Just as GBR, a tribe of the GBR, which is in that application referring to likely a tribe of giants, or at least the mighty ones. Are part of that assembly as well. And what's interesting about the Rapium and the Rapiu in the Ugaritic text is that not only did they have the ability to heal themselves, but they could heal others. And there were the kings, and there were the warriors, and there were the giants, and the ability to go back between the underworld and the physical world. So as we start to relate that to what we understand in the Bible, and that the Balim ruled over all of the land of the covenant, including Mount Hermon and including the Ugarit, we get this understanding coming out of Ezekiel 32 that we also cover off in the book. And this is just to give how much, sort of an inkling into how much information there is on the giants. They're called the terrible ones in Ezekiel 32. And Isaiah 25, they're the branch of the terrible ones that are going to be dealt with in the end time. And the terrible ones are these ones that are speaking to Pharaoh from the sides of the pit. And they're distinct from the mighty or the El, the fallen angelic ones in the pit prison. These are ones who did horrible things to humankind and were slain on the earth and now are in the sides of the abyss. And the terrible one goes back to the Hebrew word Erit.
Wow, that's pretty interesting.
And Erit, or as in terrible one, the plural would be Eritim. And you get all of these descriptions of like giants are strong and powerful and stout and things like that, but also childless and infertile. And not from producing seed, it's from producing females. So that seems to be the issue because we don't get a lot of accounts of females, and they need more females to reproduce. And that infertility is going to force them so that they don't go extinct to reproduce with the humans, where the hybrids are going to come from, and all these different hybrid nations. And one example of that is Timnah and Eliphaz in Genesis 36, outside the Table of Nations, which is really important understanding as well. And Timnah is the daughter of Seir, a Hori, another kind of Rephaim giant, and listed as giants in Deuteronomy 2 as well. And so this term of the terrible ones, Erit, is the root word for the city of Ugarit, being the second of the compounded word. And so UG seems to be because King Og was not only king of Ashtaroth and Edrei, also mentioned in the Ugaritic text, but seems to be Og's original city as being the last of the Rephaim. And that goes back to the Hebrew word Ug, which is UWG, or OWG, sorry, and goes back to its root UWG, which is, take the W out in the vowelless sort of understanding of Old Semitic, and you have the city of Kiriath, which means city is in Kiriath Arba, city of Arba, the patriarch of the Anakim, Kiriath Ud Harit, and that's city of Og, terrible one, who ruled over the Raphaim and Raphaim at that time, by the looks of things, or at least as part of that whole assembly. And then after the War of Giants in Genesis 14, once most of the Raphaim tribes wiped out, I think he migrates over there because biblically he's king of Edrei and Ashtaroth of the Bashan region of Mount Hermon. And he's going to be king over the Amorites when the Israelites show up. So that gives a bit of an insight as the connections to these beings, and that the word shade, these are the spirits of these disembodied spirits in the Ugaritic text, and that the physical ones that are still living are actually going to parade them in.
This is the most detailed I've heard gone into these giant spirits, these giant, demons. This is the most detailed account of what's happening
To the underworld and funeral processions in the Ugaritic text.
And any discussion of
I've spent centuries evolving with the world. That's the nature of being the economy, observing investors choose assets to balance risk and reward. With
giants, Nephilim, this kind of stuff, I have to ask, because I've always been curious about this, and there's a lot of theories going around about it. And I'm not sure if I'm even fully settled on one or another, but in your opinion, how did the giants return after the flood?
Great question.
Yeah, I would say there's three different buckets on that. I lean for second incursion. I think we get a verse that might infer that in Genesis 6:4, but it's not a smoking gun verse. So I leave the crack open for other options. But I think a second recreation by the Baalim, or the offspring gods, after the flood. And to understand prehistory, you have to understand there's a flood. And it doesn't matter which accounts that you're reading from, that is a dividing point. And you have parent gods like El from the Canaanite pantheon ruling before the flood, just as you have Kronos and Gaia ruling before the flood in Greek mythology, and Zeus and the Olympian gods are offspring gods that would rule after the flood. But Baal rules after the flood as the offspring or the son of El, who ruled before the flood. And it's the same account. They take over and kill all the parent gods. I don't think they do. I think the parent gods went to the pit prison. And I think that's where the offspring gods go as well, for the ones who commit the same crimes after the flood. And so I look at giants that are showing up after the flood as being Raphaim as we understand them. And that has, in the occult, one of the names associated with Baal. And Baal, and it's Raphael, it's got several different variations. And just as Satan had multiple names, all the fallen angels have multiple names and titles. And so I think that's kind of one of the titles that passes on and likely creates a giant named Rapha, who's not listed in the Table of Nations, just as Arba is not listed in the Table of Nations, because none of the Rephaim patriarchs are listed in the Table of Nations, which now explains why you have 9 patriarchless Canaanite tribes. And I'll trace those back to Rephaim names in the new book as well. And so I think that is a better way of making sense of the Bible, that you don't have to worry about some of the conflicts and issues and some of the words. Now, I do leave open the understanding, because we don't have another identical verse after the flood for the creation of giants, that giants could survive the flood. The second bucket would be somehow with the help of fallen angels. Just as God knew that the fallen angels were going to create the giants before the flood, he knows they're either going to recreate them after again, or help some survive into the post-Diluvian world, or both. And so that could be on an ark, It could be off the earth. It could be in the earth. And in the Epic of Gilgamesh, we have the creation of Gilgamesh, 6th generation after the flood, son of Lugalbanda, king of Uruk, and the female mother goddess Nin. And so that's a second incursion. So is Enkidu. But Utnapishtim, whom he goes to visit, is the Sumerian Noah in the giant survival story on another ark. All of these are classified as 2/3 God and 1/3 human, including the whole family of Utnapishtim. So you get both there. Deucalion in Greek mythology and Pyrrha, again, Deucalion being the Greek alleged Noah, he's the son of Prometheus, saved on an ark. So he's another giant. These are giant survival stories, and one of the possible ways that angels could help. The other bucket is the third bucket. Oh, and just before I pass on to that, in Genesis 6 and 7, you can make a legal argument for survival based on God was going to destroy everything he created. And the distinction there is God didn't create the giants. That's the fallen angel.
Okay, I can see that argument.
So if you wanted to make that legal argument, you could do that. I still think things fit better with the second incursion than this, but again, I'm open to that. And then somehow on the ark, what that means is the Gnostics believe Ham was a giant, all 3 sons were a giant, everybody on the ark was a giant in the different accounts. Some believe that Og, as in Jewish mysticism, was a stowaway or was hanging on the edge of the ark and survived that way. Some, as in the last Noah movie, has that as Tubal. So there's another version where it could be part of the wives' DNA that would show up after the flood and it would show up into the Canaanites. But then again, they would have a patriarch if that was the case for the 9 patriarchless tribes. I think there's a DNA thing going on the ark, but I think that's the wives carrying the DNA from the 4 races as opposed to the giants. So again, I'm open to that because we don't have, again, that smoking gun verse as to how they show up. So those are the ways. My preference is second incursion fits better with what it says in the Bible, and then other accounts that we have that come out of closely related to, like the Ugaritic texts and all the other polytheist accounts. But I cover that off mostly in the first book, but I do give some examples how it relates to second incursion in the second book.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and that to me makes the most sense too. The second incursion, it's the simplest one, And a lot of times when you read through the Bible, a lot of people overcomplicate it. And when you really look at it, it's like usually the simple answer is most often the way to go.
Well, and when you dig into the Hebrew of the creation of the giants, and when the sons of God go to the daughters of Cain, that is in like manner at a different period of time, and it's inferring that there was multiple creation of giants before the flood, but it also, by the language, would indicate after the flood. But again, it's just not quite there. Now, I just did, a show with Doug Hagman, and he thinks it is the smoking gun. And so we agree almost to that last sort of 1%, but I'm a contrarian, so I need a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely understandable. I'm with you. You had mentioned names and titles. This is something else that you write about in the book too. What are the differences between Satan, Hellel, and Lucifer? Are these all one entity or different entities? How do you view these names?
Yeah, so they're referring to the same individual. And I know a lot of people, there's a lot of people have a view in Isaiah 14 that Lucifer might be a Nephilim or another angel or something like that. I tend to put everything around what Jesus said first. Let Jesus be, the defining thing on all things that we have that we talked about. And so in Luke 10:18, it says that Jesus saw Satan fall from heaven like lightning. And it's describing what's being described in Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28, and elsewhere. And so not only is Satan called a devil But he's also called a serpent and a dragon in Revelation 12. So he has sort of multiple aspects to him. And in Ezekiel 28, he's described as a cherubim, an anointed cherubim that walked amongst the fiery stones. Cherubim don't do that. And you have seraphim that do. There are 6-winged serpent-faced angels that work as ministers that Isaiah 6 talks about. So that gives him something unique. He's cherubim and he's seraphim and archangel and probably high priest based on the 7 jewels or the 9 jewels that he had. And just as the Levite priests have 12 jewels, just so I don't leave that sort of dangling there. So he has many positions, titles, and names, and we don't know how many names. The book of Enoch might suggest another name called Gabriel. Gabriel was in the Garden of Eden, just as the cherubim was. That means wall of God, as you take that back to Hebrew. Even though we don't have a Hebrew manuscript, that's how you build that name up. Or God's wall, if you wanted to translate it that way, just as Raphael would be God heals or healer of God, depending on how you wanted to translate that. So in Isaiah 14, you get this verse that's talking about Lucifer as the son of the morning. And in Hebrew, it's Hellel ben Shachar. And so that's Heyllel, which typically an angel has at the end of his name an El, like Michael or Gabriel. And typically, the Bible would translate Michael and Gabriel directly as the name and not the meaning. But somehow there's a confusion here, I'll put it that way, as to how to deal with Heyllel. And the King James Version translators used Lucifer, which is understood from Latin from several different words, meaning Venus and light and words like that, and as the morning star. Well, he's not the morning star, and that's not the translation there. Jesus is the morning star. This is Heyllel ben Shachar, Heyllel, son of the morning. Now, he may be part of the morning star order as well as the other orders that he's in, just as you have the morning star order in Job 38 with the sons of God, celebrating at the time of creation. And I think that's, again, part of his titles, but Lucifer is a Latin word inserted for a Hebrew word into the English language, which is the god of the Freemasons. And that just makes no sense to me. And neither does the Daystar translations for the other translations as well. And I think it should be translated as Heyllel. And he's the god of hell. And I'll make a case etymologically that you can make a case that that's what it's referring to in part as one of his titles as Hell-El, as the god of hell. And also will break down that hell is a conflated term in the Bible that adds to confusion. You have to understand it as different places. And it's, to me, it would be better translated whether or not it is Hades or Sheol or the lake of fire or the other meanings that it has attached to it, as opposed to just one conflated term. And I think it helps dismiss it as being a real place when they do that. So Hellel is another name that people like to use, as that's the reference to the king of Babylon in Isaiah 13 and 14. Hellel is not Heyllel. It is an allegorical derivative as it's defined, but we don't get Hellel anywhere in the Bible as translated into English with that as a Hebrew word. So when people look at Hellel as being a Nephilim type of character, I think that might be possible, but as it relates to the king of Babylon, because the king of Babylon never raised his throne to heaven. Tyrus never walked amongst the fiery stones in Ezekiel 28. So you have something called a dual prophecy here. And I'll talk about this in the new book as well. And it's important to understand specific passages. So a dual prophecy has distinct characteristics. It has information in prehistory. That's important to understand the Old Testament, and important to understand end time prophecy. It is a prophecy, as in Isaiah 13 and 14, in the period of Isaiah and in the time of the beast empire of Assyria. And that's why you have this Syrian in there. And Assyria is basically an empire that's coming out of, Babylon is an empire that's coming out of Assyria, and the king of Babylon reference as well in Isaiah. So it's a prophecy for Isaiah's time, but not all of those details were fulfilled in Isaiah's time with Assyria or Babylon. But there are details reserved for the end time. And it's those details that are congruent with the prophet's time that we can use for an analogy of the end time. And in this case, Antichrist raising his throne to heaven in Daniel 8:10. And in this case, the Assyrian being killed on the mountains of Israel in Isaiah 14. And so Ezekiel 28 is a similar dual prophecy. And there's a number of those dual prophecies I'll cover off in this new book.
That's really interesting. It's amazing how the Old Testament and all this historical stuff can connect with prophecy. Something that you mentioned, which is really interesting, is the position of high priest in the angelic orders. And this is something that came up in my research too, when I was looking into the Dead Sea Scrolls and things, is that they had an understanding that there's the earthly temple and everything that happens there, but there's also the heavenly temple. But it's not just
I don't think Gary's on board with the Essenes. Let's see what he's got to say here.
Place for God to sit and nothing happens there. There's heavenly temple rituals as well, and there's angels in positions, and we even see that in the Bible too, like in Revelation 8, where we see some of these things happen. What can you tell us about the hierarchy of angels and what positions there are?
Yeah, there's a sort of a standard chronology, not a chronology, but a hierarchy that's out there. Dionysius is a church father that put most of this together. And so I cover off the hierarchy in the new book. And the first thing we need to understand is that the angels are a host of heaven. And that's the Hebrew word Saba for an army of angels, implying rank and order. Now, when I looked at Dionysus' model, it's not easy to understand or follow or prove biblically. And he's got several different names for the same orders, just as in the New Testament, you get a confusion of like dunamis and exousia being conflated into powers into English, right? So you have to sort of be able to take it back to the original Hebrew and the original Greek to get the different angels and sort of assemble the order. And it also in Dionysus' hierarchy, you have the archangels placed in the third hierarchy with principalities and angels. And so that doesn't make any sense to me either, because archangels are around the throne. They're like part of the four groups of watchers. And Dionysus doesn't really account for who the thrones are and where they come from. And so I sort of dig into all of that. So the four watchers, I put four watchers at the top, and they will be over a column of other angels. And I put this hierarchy in the Bible, and I walked through the different words so that you can understand the different words that, let's say, dunamis or exousia are being translated from. And it can be translated in different ways into English. And it's going back to the same word, or arpa for principalities, for example. So I begin with the four watcher groups. So I moved the archangels up to the watcher group, and they're around the angels. And I even move up a possibility that four archangels might oversee the four columns of angels in the hierarchy, just as you have four sides to the throne, where the angels will assemble themselves. So I divide the hierarchy up into governments, religions, armies, and thrones. And leading that would be the seraphim in two groups of the governments and the religions. The seraphim being the six-winged fiery serpent angels that work before the altar. I also have archangels up there, and then I have the cherubim and the Ophanim as the same group, I'm open to the idea that the Ophanim may have a separate pillar as well. But typically they're kind of used together. If people aren't familiar with that term Ophanim, it's in the book of Enoch as one of the 4 groups of watchers. And we don't get that word translated into English, but in Ezekiel 1, 3, and 10, we get the throne, the chariot of God as in the vision of Ezekiel. And it's got the cherubim. And then in the book of Psalms, it's the cherubim that are pulling the chariot of God, the throne of God in that visual and vision context. But then you have these wheels, part of the chariot, wheels within wheels. And within those wheels, you have a cherubim-like angel, but distinct because it has a face of a cherubim. We're not told which face, or maybe it's all 4 faces on the one face. We don't know. But it's different, but it's cherubim-like. So the wheels that are being talked about in that chariot, when it's referring to the wheel, that's the Hebrew word Gilgal, as in, base camp Gilgal, where Israel had their base camp, or Gilgal Raphaim, the wheel of the giants, at the foot of Mount Hermon. But when it's referring to the angels within the wheels, the one with all of the eyes, that's the Hebrew word Ophan. And then you put the male plural on Ophanim is where that comes from. So I have the archangels overseeing the army aspect of heaven, and then the cherubim and the Ophanim over the thrones. And then you'll have, I'll just use the English terms. So the seraphim, the governments, you have powers below the seraphim, and then angels. The religious order there, you have the principalities under the seraphim, and then messenger angels, archangels. You have the mighties, which are also 2 different types of mighties that are listed, whether it's Icarus, which is the revelation term for mighties, and then angels underneath, and then thrones and dominions. So it's the cherubim and Ophanim, which are the thrones, and underneath are the dominions and the angels. And they're representing the throne rooms. And so when we now have the counterfeit army, the counterfeit host that Satan sits above, or the council of gods in Psalms 82, he's going to counterfeit the same hierarchy. And so they're going to rule over the 70 nations that Deuteronomy 32 talks about. And this is the same 70 nations that were counted by the sons of Adam before the flood. So Deuteronomy 2 is very similar to a dual prophecy, giving us prehistory, the time of the Exodus, and then some implications as you would roll forward with Jacob inheriting the children of Israel title, Yisrael, which is a compound word for, the sons of, as in children, Ben, Israel as being the sons of the ruling God, is one of the, I think, the closest translations would have, or the ruling mighty most high God, as in El Elyon. And I cover that off in detail as well. But you have these 70 nations, plus you have this council of gods, and you have the 7 wandering stars. So Satan has his own throne room on earth that sits above the council of gods, and I think at Mount Hermon. And then you have the 7 wandering stars who have their throne rooms. That is, I think they would have a certain number of nations under those 7 stars, probably 10, making 70 nations. And then each of those nations would have their own throne room. And then as they create junior offshoots from that master nation, there would be throne rooms above that. So you can imagine multiple layers of this coming down. And just like the archangels in heaven have an army, and they're the ones that are going to do battle with Satan's army, there's an army league as well that we see manifested physically on earth with the visible ones as well, with rank and order. So you have physical thrones representing the
Diane, that link won't load for me.
Visible ones who rule this earth. You have their army. Every aspect of that ruling hierarchy and infrastructure is represented through the thrones, the governments, the armies, the religions, and the courts.
Man, that is so interesting, and something that you mentioned too, and obviously we can't cover the entire book today. I wish we could, because I could listen to this for hours. But there is something that I have to make sure I get in here, because
Okay, Guy,
I saw
thanks.
you have some sections available on your website, and you have the chapter list, and one of those chapters is the unicorns of Mount Hermon. What are the unicorns of Mount Hermon?
Well, it all sort of fits in once you start to peel back the layers. So you have this word, that unicorn, that is understood in the occult as this mythical, happy little chimera type of animal that doesn't get on the ark because it's plain. And it's a big part of the occult, but not just as that physical presence, but something greater. So the first thing to understand is unicorn derives from the Hebrew word rem, for wild bull. And so unicorn should not be in there. And it's an occult mythos that's been overlaid. Now, it could be a single horn bull, sure, but that's not the occult representation of the unicorn. And the unicorn is part of the coat of arms of the mighty Prince James. Mighty is in Gabor, Prince James, sponsor of the King James Version Bible, and his proposed world empire that he and his descendants were going to build through the Stuart dynasty. So you have a unicorn and a lion that's on his coat of arms. And everything on the coat of arms is taciturn language for their genealogies back to specific patriarchs, as in Rephaim and Nephilim, and to specific godfathers of the celestial mafia, fallen angels. And so that's part of the imagery, and where unicorn has been inserted, it's there to expand his mythos, so to speak. And so it's also used in relationship with Mount Hermon. And so unicorn, in the standard physical world mythos, was the horse that Nephilim and Rephaim used to, in a different format after the flood, would ride into battle. And again, it has a single horn, and it is this chimera type of horse. It has multiple different parts to it. So it's involving some sort of angelic technology, some sort of DNA manipulation that we're just catching up to, that they had in the days of Noah. And that this unicorn horse is, the horse that's represented on the king, on the Windsor and the Stuart, and the double unicorn on the Hanover coat of arms, from which the Windsor's original name was Hanover, as they replaced the Stuarts. And so this is an understanding that we need to understand, that if it was a chimera animal, and the mythos is that the unicorn missed going on the ark, it's because it was not pure in its DNA. It wasn't called to the ark. It wasn't playing. It was this horrible, powerful animal that could kill an elephant with its horn. It was that big. And
Wonder what's going on with that, Di, the tanker.
it was huge because the giants were huge.
Hang on, I want to hear that bit again.
That this unicorn horse is, the horse that's represented on the king, on the Windsor and the Stuart, and the double unicorn on the Hanover coat of arms, from which the Windsor's original name was Hanover, as they replaced the Stuarts. And so this is an understanding that we need to understand, that if it was a chimera animal, and the mythos is that the unicorn missed going on the ark, it's because it was not pure in its DNA. It wasn't called to the ark. It wasn't playing. It was this horrible, powerful animal that could kill an elephant with its horn. It was that big, and it was huge because the giants were huge. But that's not the only meaning it has. And that single horn also is the single horn understood in the occult as the unicorn, single horn of the beast empires that rises amongst the the 10 kings in Daniel
The
7
little
and the
horn,
single
yeah.
horn in Daniel
The
8.
little horn.
And so this is sort of saying in their language of how they use this is that Prince James saw himself as an antichrist type figure that was trying to create a world government, or at least through his bloodline descendancy, and possible bloodline for the antichrist. But in the larger version of this unicorn, it's thought to be an angelic being. So now when we get into Greek mythology, you have like Zeus and Apollo and other gods and goddesses who have this chariot being pulled by these white horses, flying white horses. And in some of them, they're unicorns. And so this is the throne of fallen angels in the physical world, just as it's a counterfeit of what's being talked about in Ezekiel 1, 3, and 10, where the cherubim are pulling the chariot. And so these in the occult allegory are fallen cherubim. And the unicorn single horn is the third eye that this special
Hey,
knowledge
Wyatt, good to
is
see ya.
passed on from the heavenly realm to their followers. And so when we look at how the occult tries to immerse us in everything and tries to corrupt everything, we need to understand that they have a long-term plan to deceive Christians in the end time. And we need to be aware of all of these allegories and
Phil, what's Spreaker? I don't know what that is.
things that they believe. And it's not, and it is, what we've talked about on a couple of shows in the past, is not whether or not I believe everything they say, that's important. It's that they believe it, and it's what they're doing with that belief system that we have to be aware of. And they're the ones that are trying to bring in the New World Government, the universal religion, and to bring in the Antichrist.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, and that's why stuff like this is so important. Well, we only covered the first 2 sections of the book, and we barely scratched the surface on those. And there are 7 sections in total. So, again, unfortunately, we don't have time to cover the whole book. But I do want to know, what do you want most for people to take away from our conversation today?
Great questions.
Yeah, what I'd like people to take away is to have a hunger or a passion to curiosity to dig deeper into the Bible. Because if indeed we're in the end time, if we're in the fig tree generation, then the size of the deceptions are going to be so great we can't imagine it. And that even the elect will be deceived if that were possible. And Jesus warns that it is, that even the elect would accept Antichrist as the Messiah. That's how large the deception is going to be and how convincing it's going to be. And that unless Jesus stepped in, no flesh would be saved. So we have to understand this, and then we have to understand it in how it means for us in terms of the tribulations that we're going to go through. And what that means in terms of when Jesus is coming. We're only promised 2 things by Jesus. One, we're going to be saved from the wrath, which is the year of the Lord's wrath. And the other is that we're going to be saved from the hour of trial.
Oh, right.
And that hour of trial is that time of Antichrist rising to power. So we have to put on the full armor of God, and we do that by not only having strong faith, but having enough knowledge within the Bible to take on the arguments and the deceptions that are going to be specifically targeted to break down that faith and to lead people away from God and into the hands of the globalists and the Antichrist.
Amen. Well, when is the book out? Where can people get it? And how can people follow you online?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the book for the excerpts are out on my website at the Genesis6conspiracy.com. So I have a generous excerpt of book 1 of all 98 chapters, and I have a generous excerpt of...
What email address did he just give?
Amen. Well, when is the book out? Where can people get it? And how can people follow you online?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the book for the excerpts are out on my website at the Genesis6conspiracy.com. So I have a generous excerpt of book 1 of all 98 chapters, and I have a generous excerpt of all 84 chapters of the new book. And so people will get a good feel for it. But like the first book, even though there's a generous excerpt, that is a small piece of the information that's coming at you in this book. It's written in the same manner in little mini stories that lead into the next chapter that keep adding information to the narrative as the book unfolds. So you can read a chapter at a time or a couple chapters or flip around anywhere that you want to do it and come back. It's written in that sort of way. So on my website, you can pre-order the book. It's got a release date of March the 12th. It's a date that we hope we're going to beat. There's a shortage of paper out there in the publishing industry. There's a shortage of printers and there's a shortage of labor. So publishers have to put out a date that they have to meet. If they don't, then retailers, particularly the very large ones, will punish that publisher. So you have to meet that date. So we're hoping to beat that date, hoping to have the printed copy available as soon as I have it. I'll be shipping the books. So you can pre-order on the website. You can pre-order through Amazon.com. You can pre-order through BarnesandNoble.com right from my website. Links over there. Kindle version isn't out yet. The digital version is already in Amazon's hands, so there will be a digital version, but they haven't released that yet either. But they may release that sooner as well. So that's the easiest way to get a hold of my book, find out about my book, and to pre-order the book. And go to the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis6 with the number 6conspiracy.com. And I've done a few changes on the website as well, so it's easier to access me now. There's a place for people to contact me on the media page to click on for an interview, and then I also have a contact the author page. So if people want to get a document on some of the information that I might be talking about, like second incursion or things like that, just get a hold of me, ask my topic, and I send that out at no charge.
Oh, fantastic. That's great. Well, we're definitely going to have you back on before the book comes out. So keep me posted because I'd love to get more into prophecy and all that kind of stuff. That would be a lot of fun because I know you deal with that heavily in the book as well. But unfortunately for today, we are all out of time. Gary, thank you so much for joining us again. We'll definitely have to have you back on sometime soon.
Well, thank you. And so happy to be here. And hopefully we've raised a little bit of curiosity because that's what the book is designed to do.
Yeah, I think so. I think people are going to be really excited about this book. And also all of you out there, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe. Give us a thumbs up if you like this interview. Comment, share this around. And when you subscribe, turn on all notifications so you know when a new episode comes out. All right. So for everybody out there, thank you so much. Love you all. Until next time, take care and God bless. Now, I've always been passionate about bringing truth to the forefront, and now more than ever, our Christian community needs a platform to discuss these pressing issues openly.
Amen.
There's no denying that we live in a time when censorship quickly has become the norm. We've all seen it, voices silenced and crucial topics skirted around, especially when they blend biblical truths with politics or current events. But what if we could actually change that narrative? If not for the world, at least in our community here that we hold dear. And by community, I don't even mean your I mean our community here online, you and me and everybody watching. So I mentioned before, I'm teaming up with my good friend Zach Drew. Many of you might remember him from the Jim Baker Show. Zach's heart for the Lord and the gospel is immense. Yet, despite his dedication, the limitations of working within a 501c3 for the Zach Drew Show, it's restricted the breadth of his message. Biblical truths and political events are directly relevant to our faith, and we're compelled to avoid discussing these things. And this is by other Christians. This is by Christians within the 501c3 construct. That's where our vision for Daily Renegade comes in. Now, Daily Renegade, it's not just another video streaming service. It's really a movement. It's a subscription-based video streaming platform combined with a vibrant social media community. So imagine being a part of a space where there's absolute freedom to discuss the Bible, politics, and current events without the looming shadow of censorship. And you get one place for everything. So you don't have to do YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, and you don't have to do all these. All of it is in one place. and again, without censorship. Our dream is for Daily Renegade to host shows such as the Sharpening Report, which you're watching now, the Zach Drew podcast, which is going to be a new thing we'll be launching, Peck Perspective, which is a show that I've been doing for the Paul Revere Report, if you want to switch it over, and even more enlightening content in the future. So this is more than just
heading to the airport or across Sydney. Roselle Interchange is now open. Save up to 19 minutes from Parramatta to the city using the M4 and new Roselle Interchange. Take WestConnex and get to what matters. Transit operator of Links.
Are you looking to refinance? Home loan approval is fast and simple with our experts at Greater Bank.
Dr. Judd Burton, author of Interview with the Giant, plus several groundbreaking papers, and his website is burtonbeyond.com. If you'd like to learn more, we will have that link for you in the description below. Judd, it's great to have you back on the Sharpening Report. How are you doing?
Great to be back, Josh. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm really glad that you reached out and wanted to do this. This is one of my favorite topics, and I want to just jump right in because, as you know, because you actually contributed an interview for this, I have a new book coming out later this year on the Dead Sea Scrolls, Essenes, and prophecy. And I know the whole topic of the Dead Sea Scrolls is something you've always had an interest in as well. What first led to that interest? How did you first get introduced to this topic, and what was it about it that you found so appealing?
Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls, I should say that I was exposed to them in church, but not in a churchy kind of a way, I guess might be a way, because they were always this sort of nebulous, arcane set of documents, that the preacher would drop, every now and again, or you'd hear about in Sunday school or something like that. It was they might as well have been written in Elvish, and stocked away in some cave in Middle Earth. But no, my exposure to them, just in terms of concept and name, was fairly early on, and I'm almost certain that it was a combination of my dad talking about who has taught Sunday school for decades, told me about this other arm of Judaism that existed during the Second Temple period in the first century, when Jesus was around. The Essenes, the Sadducees and the Pharisees were the ones that got top billing, but the Essenes were these strange fellows that don't get mentioned, except for in the margins and the periphery of whatever lesson might be put forward. And the other exposure, I'm almost certain, was under the late Dr. George Knight, who was a mentor of mine, and he was the brother-in-law of our pastor, and would come over and do Bible studies. And he was an archaeologist too, and so a lot of his field experience helped to illustrate some pretty salient points in those studies. And I'm almost certain, as a youngster, I while picking his brain after these study sessions, I was probably the only 8 or 9 year old in a room full of men, in these January Bible studies that he would do, and he would graciously, answer all my questions. And I'm almost positive that part of my exposure was then, but it really wasn't until I got into college and I began to take Bible classes, theology classes, the history of biblical lands and the church, that I began to really sort of dive into the Dead Sea Scrolls proper. And I think really, as we talked about on our last show, the expedition to Banias, or Peneus, Caesarea Philippi, that sort of set me down on this road, really sort of opened that world of the Dead Sea Scrolls up to me, particularly the apocryphal material that had to do with Mount Hermon. And that that in a nutshell was kind of my introduction to the Dead Sea Scrolls. But as I say, it wasn't until I was actually prepping to leave for that expedition to Banias that I actually started reading, stuff like the Book of Enoch and the Genesis Apocryphon and Jubilees and some of the other stuff that's in the apocryphal cache of the Dead Sea Scrolls that shed light directly on the significance in the Jewish mind as to why that region was important on a cosmic level.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's so cool how pivotal but mysterious this group really is. Can you explain the landscape of the time of Jesus? Who were the main Jewish sects that you mentioned? Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes. And why is it that we don't actually see the word Essenes anywhere in the Gospels when they were clearly a well-known group? They were influential in the community at the time. What's the story there in the Gospels? Why don't we see Essenes mentioned?
Well, of course, as listeners will probably be familiar with, the main three, and there certainly were other sects of Judaism.
Yeah.
But particularly during such a tumultuous time as the first century AD, some of those are combinations of religious and political movements like the Zealots. But the big three were the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the Essenes, with the third one being the lesser of the three in terms of number.
Yeah.
But not influence, as I think you and I would agree on. But the Sadducees were really they were the temple bureaucracy. They were the overarching sort of theocratic court, if you will, consisting, of course, of priests. And the Pharisees were they're often referred to as the scribes and elders in the Gospels and the New Testament. And these were basically the lawyers and scholars of all of the, not just the Mosaic Law, but all the minutiae and commentary that went along with them. That's why they're the most haggling of Jesus's. Haggling is probably not the right word, but the most annoying of the crowds that Jesus draw, because they have all the little higgly-piggly questions for Jesus. And then you have the Essenes, who broke away as early as the 4th century, but probably into the 3rd century BC, excuse me. They had seen that the sort of corruption, I think it was a different kind of corruption in the Second Temple period, but the sort of, my take on it is that they saw the legalism that was growing was basically bastardizing the state of Judaism that Yahweh had presented to the Jews. And they were like, we're out of here. We're not going to be doing this anymore. And so they leave to the desert regions on the borders of the Transjordan and set up these communities.
If you're considering retirement living, you're likely to have a few questions.
Monastic communities, in essence, in which they practice a form of Judaism that they felt called to practice. It was an expectant. Just from reading the literature, it was a more expectant, messianic-driven, apocalyptic-driven sect of Judaism than the other two were. Which is why I think that a number of them.
Why? He's not even showing up at the debates. He couldn't even be bothered doing that. He's that far ahead. I can't see him not being president unless somehow he gets convicted of a felony. And that's the whole plan of weaponizing the law against him. But gee, it's looking pretty good for him. Let's be honest. I know Trump's a stooge and he's part of the plan, but he's much better than Biden.
I think demonstrably, even not only from written material that we find from Jewish authors, but also outside authors prove that these the Essenic Jews actually became, at least in some of their numbers, became Christians eventually because of the theology and the ritual that they practice, and a lot of the phraseology that they share with figures in the New Testament like John the Baptist and Jesus.
Yeah, and that was something that was really fascinating in my research as well. Just seeing that, like, once you really kind of get a grasp of the basics of the Dead Sea Scrolls and then what this group taught, what they believed, who they were, you actually do see quite a bit in the New Testament about it. I mean, in Acts, for example, I've come to believe that when, and I could be wrong on this, but I've come to believe there's at least a possibility when Paul was on the road to Damascus that might not have been Syria, but might have been Qumran, because in the Dead Sea Scrolls they actually called their community Damascus in a couple different places, and it makes
wow, that's interesting. Paul might have had his vision in where the Essenes are and not Syria itself. Wow.
More sense why Paul would have to go to the temple to get letters of authority or permission to be able to go to Damascus to persecute followers of the way. If that's all the way in Syria, I don't know if they would need permission from the temple in Israel.
That's a really good pickup. So it is actually the Dead Sea the Essenes.
So there's little things like that when you take them and kind of group them together, they all pile up and kind of form this new picture. So how did these groups form? So we have a period of about 400 years that's called the Silent Years between the Testaments. So we have the end of the Old Testament, everything makes sense, we kind of get the story, we know what's going on, and then you turn the page to the New Testament, and all of a sudden there's Pharisees and Sadducees. The whole structure in Israel is completely different. And on the surface, it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of explanation for that. So what happened during what's called the 400 Silent Years that produced these three main groups, and how did the Dead Sea Scrolls actually come to be?
Well, there's certainly a lot of political upheaval in the region. Israel, once it's basically reconstituted, or I should say Judah, once it's reconstituted after Babylonian captivity, there are these spurts of sovereignty that the country will enjoy, but those are relatively short-lived because you eventually have outside powers vying for control over this stretch of land, which has been part of the history of ancient Israel, as you well know. But one of the big turning points certainly would have been the acquisition of this territory by Alexander and his Macedonian Empire. And we're talking mid to late 4th century BC when all of that gets constituted. And of course, in the wake of his death in 325, that all of the territory that he controlled is sort of divvied up amongst his generals. And the Ptolemies have the Levant initially, but the Seleucids will actually battle the Ptolemies at one point and gain control of the Levant. And so for the bulk of that period, you've got, like I say, you do have interregnums, if you will, of some Jewish control, but it's mainly a Hellenistic state at this point. And you have the basically the descendants of Seleucus in this point ruling over Israel. And of course, there's another upheaval once the Hellenistic control wanes, and that's in 63. BC, when Pompey, one of the triumvirate generals and a close friend of Julius Caesar, will basically take the Eastern Mediterranean and hand it over to Rome. And so at that point, it comes directly under Roman control. And the Romans, of course, cared less about how you worshipped, and because most people in the Mediterranean basin were pagans, without getting too far off base, but they valued law and order and their view of social stability above everything else, which was causing the clash in a lot of cases with the Jews. And so this is sort of the political backdrop of that inter-biblical period, as it's sometimes called, those silent years, when a lot is actually taking place in terms of Jewish politics and Jewish theology. You have this is the period early on when you have the establishment of these sects of Judaism, Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Essenes, and the lesser ones that certainly existed. But the Sadducees and the Pharisees basically were the theological overlords of Judaism at the time, and it's, to the credit of the Essenes, I think they, like I say, they saw the corruptive influence of the temple bureaucracy and the staunch, almost unloving execution of Judaism as something that was foreign to what Yahweh had given to the Hebrews, and so they broke apart. Heard a call. I firmly believe they heard a call to do that. So this sort of gives you some idea of politically what's happening in the backdrop during the interbiblical period. Like you say, if you're just reading the Bible through, and you get to the end of the Old Testament and you start into the New Testament, it's like, wait a second, did we miss did we miss a chapter or two in the book here? And without knowing something about the interbiblical period, that's what a through the Bible reading kind of feels like. But the fact of the matter is that there's a lot politically, historically, culturally, theologically that's significant that's going on during this period.
Yeah, definitely. And so the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves, are these like books from the main temple library that when these Jews or the sons of Zadok, they go by different names, but when this group broke off, did they bring these books from the temple library with them, or did they just copy them down once they got there? How did the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves actually come to be, and why do you think that they were left there in Qumran?
Well, you bring up an interesting point. The Essenes are many scholars believe that they're sort of the intellectual, theological descendants of the Zadokite priests, who were the, Bible students of the Bible will recall were very staunch, probably the staunchest opponents of the pagan influences against Israel at the, in both the more so the divided kingdom period, but there's definitely some connective tissue there. Now, in terms of the copies of material that they had with them, it's probably a mixed bag with the original stuff that they took from the temple. Probably some of it was original from the temple. Some of it's I think about 35 or 40% of the Dead Sea Scroll material, that is, the material that's been found at Qumran, is Hebrew Bible material, and then you've got about 30% or so of apocryphal stuff like Enoch and the Genesis Apocryphon and Jubilees. And then the rest of it is essentially, it has to do, it's like the monastic order. It has to do with their rites and rituals and rule.
Get the garden into shape this Christmas with the Ryobi One Plus range. Give a gift that's One Plus.
Okay, that usually means Wi-Fi's dropped out, guys. So hang on. Okay, we're back. Come on.
And rules and things like that. All of the asceticism and ritual bathing in the mikvah, and from the most sacred of rules down to the most earthly, mundane sorts of things. And so that's why I say that at least for that 35 or 40% of material that's Hebrew Bible, it's probably coming from the temple. It's probably a mixed bag. Part of their function, after all, is scribal, and so they're definitely, we definitely get a sense that there were scriptura at Qumran, so they would have been copying a lot of this stuff.
These documents were discovered not too long ago, a few decades ago. So what happened? Why were these left? Because in my research, it seems like the main narrative is kind of, they say, well, there was a big persecution, so they fled and they left all their books behind. But I don't know, because it sort of seems like they became Christians and took the gospel out to the nations. They were following the orders of the Great Commission. So do you think that them leaving this treasure trove of books, was that done intentionally? Was it done kind of haphazardly because they were trying to get out really fast because of a coming persecution? Or did they have something in mind for that? Why do you think all of these books were left where they were?
Great question.
Well, you could certainly argue the persecution arm, but you run into things in stuff like Enoch about this literature being written for a later generation.
Right.
How they were going, how they were going to get that material to whatever generation needed it. This was probably the best thing that the Essenes thought they could do, was to.
Wow, he's pretty wise. That sounds like what happened.
Bottle it up and protect it as much as they possibly could. Because as you say, there's good evidence that many of them did become Christians, and that this sort of aha moment for me was in during the course of my dissertation. I read a number of Epiphanius's material, and of course he was an early church father who lived in the 4th century AD, and he associates the reason that I ran into them is because a group of them apparently ended up in the sort of General Bonius Caesarea Philippi region over the preceding centuries, and he names Bacchanatus or Britannia, which is the Latinized version of that, as one of the regions that they ended up in. And he associates these two groups together in terms of their theology and sort of their theological trajectory. He mentions the Essenes and their order and their practices, and he also mentions he describes them also as the Elkosites and the Nazoreans. And I believe that these are two groups that did end up converting to Christianity, just because of again the theological trajectory that they're taking and the way that Epiphanius is writing about it.
Yeah, it's fascinating looking into the history of that and seeing how it stretches across, into our church age today. You mentioned the Book of Enoch, and I wanted to ask you about the Book of Enoch because, of course, the Qumran community held it in high regards. How did they view the Book of Enoch during that, like the time of Jesus? How did they view that, or even the 2nd century BC around that time? And then how are we as Christians?
Josh asks a really good questions, doesn't he? He knows pretty much a lot about quantum physics as well. He's got a very good, intelligent mind.
Today, not to understand the Book of Enoch, because I think a lot of people have some confusion about this. You get extremes on both sides. You get Christians that say you absolutely shouldn't even look at it, or you'll burst into flames, because it's so evil. Then you get other Christians, then you get other Christians that say, well, we need to put it in the Bible. It belongs in the Bible. It's the 67th book of the Bible. Yeah. All this ridiculous stuff. So you get these extremes, and I think there's a lot of confusion about it. So how did the Qumran community view the Book of Enoch, and how are we as Christians today meant to understand it?
Well, again, sort of drilling down and back into the theology of the Qumran community, that the Essenes were they were an expectant group. They were clearly, in my mind, it seems that they were clearly. They did everything that they did, from leaving the temple infrastructure and going out into the desert. They did all of that because they wanted to focus on one expectation, and that was the arrival of the Messiah. You read their stuff, and it's apocalyptic. It's expecting the next chapter. In other words, it's expecting the end of this age and the beginning of the next one, and wrapped up in all of that, of course. Wrapped up in all of that, of course, is the expectation that the Messiah is going to come back on the scene. And I tend to think that, particularly because the scholarship points to the 1st century AD kind of being the zenith of the Essene community. And if that's the case, that would certainly make sense when you start to look at the kind of stuff that John the Baptist is talking about, the phraseology that Jesus is also using. Just reading it from that, it looks like the Essene, at least some of the Essenes, recognize that, well, we don't have to wait anymore, because we've got this book that it has to be centuries, if not millennia, older than the actual writing down, because Enoch is the culmination of oral tradition, just like the entire, Torah is the culmination of oral tradition. It existed in oral form long before it was ever written down. The Hebrews don't have a written language until the 10th or 9th century, the 11th or 10th century BC. And so in like manner, Enoch is kind of a culmination of all of that oral tradition. And clearly, because you sort of, I guess to sort of use a Jungian phraseology, you get archetypes of not just the teacher or the Son of Man or the Messiah or whatever, but also the end of the age, and even the intimations of the Antichrist can be found in a lot of that. And so I think that because Jesus's ministry was so ambulatory, he would, there would be Essenes that would be hearing a lot of this and putting two and two together. And so, And I think we've got our guy here. I don't think we have to wait much longer for this. And so, Enoch would have been, of central importance, I think, particularly in that zenith period of the 1st century AD.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You mentioned that Enoch is apocalyptic, and it obviously is. Do you believe that the Book of Enoch has accurate prophecy? And if so, what does it say about our time or our future? Can we glean anything from the Book of Enoch pertaining to our time today?
Again, I'm not a date setter, but by the same token, where Jesus chides the Pharisees for being able to predict when it was going to rain, but they couldn't read the signs of the times around them. I think in like manner we can apply, the Book of Enoch to our own time, and the fact that it says that it was made for, a generation in the future. Even if it isn't our exact generation, it speaks more to us than it did at the time that it was written. Then it was just a forewarning. Now it's
actual
in
play, yeah,
in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I think, without getting too science fiction about things, because there's such commentary, in Enoch on the pre-flood world and what's going on with the Watchers and the Nephilim, we're at the point now to where that sort of combination of practical sciences and occult knowledge that the Watchers taught humanity, we're at the point now to where we're starting to see a lot of things that blur the line between science and magic. And I think if there's any commentary, I mean, my gosh, the news about the chimera, the human monkey chimera came out, and we've been doing that probably for decades. It's just that we just get to see the surface news about that, and we're in the quantum age right now. We have super colliders that are,
wow, that's a good way to put it. We're in the quantum age nowadays. Wow, Josh Peck's good on quantum physics.
Speak probably creating artificial black holes, and even the people that work at places like CERN report very, very strange things, outside the realm of scientific quantification. Quantum computing in any other language would seem to be magic, because quantum computers dump their questions literally into other dimensions to derive the answers. So I think in a way, because of the manner in which this sort of new technology is unfolding, and perhaps even the purposes that it's being used for, I think that sort of points us back to what the Watchers were teaching humanity and why they were teaching it to them in the pre-flood world. That's one reason why I think Enoch is going to become more and more pertinent as we see more of this, being released to the public. Again, I'm not a date setter, and I'm certainly not a prophet, but again, it's hard to ignore the signs of the times.
That's right.
That the kinds of events that happen in
we all know, at least we're in the season. We all know that
pre-flood world are starting to unfold now. And beyond that, the kind of lawlessness that was epiphenomenal of the activity of the Watchers and the Giants would seem to be pertinent as well.
Yeah, I agree. It's amazing to read through the Book of Enoch and see how relevant it actually is for our day today. And like you said, it's unique in the fact that it's more pertinent for today than it was when it was first written, which is absolutely amazing. And what's cool about it too is, we have the Ethiopic version of Enoch, and that's really extensive. We have a lot there. And then in the Dead Sea Scrolls, to me, we have enough fragments to where you can compare the two and see they are extremely, extremely close. So much so that if people say, well, the Ethiopic version could just be fabricated or made up, it's like, well, if that were true, they would have had to have known which parts of the Dead Sea Scroll version were going to degrade, which parts were going to be left,
Right.
and they would have had to fake around that. And I just don't see how that's even remotely possible. So, in my opinion, based on these comparisons that we can look at, I think that the Ethiopic version isn't going to be a perfect translation, but I think it's really close. It's definitely close enough to where we can still get something from it. And so it's amazing that there is quite a bit in there about our day and what we're heading into. I'll tell you what, we're going to take a quick break, but before we do, Judd, where can people follow you online and get a hold of your materials?
Well, certainly they can look at burtonbeyond.com. The Institute of Biblical Anthropology website is tioba.org, and both of those are undergoing some much-needed renovation right now, so if people will bear with me. Facebook, YouTube. I do several programs, the Beyond Report, Quick Classics, which is sort of Greek and Roman and Jewish classics that people can get snippets of, and occasionally Antiquity X and Sunday School X, which are more visually driven. Yeah, those are the big places.
Excellent.
Oh, you're sub to him.
Well, we have a lot more to talk about, but we're going to do that in the members only section right after this. Dr. Ken Johnson and I, if those of you out there are familiar with Dr. Ken Johnson, he's been a guest on before. We're going to have him back on again to talk about this calendar. But he has a website called dsscalendar.org, and it's basically an online version of the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, which is a great resource. It's for free. Anybody can use it, but it does also mean that you have to, it's not an app, it's a website. So you have to pull out your phone every time you want to look at it and scroll around and look for things. So I reached out to Ken and I said, hey, what would you think about us kind of like going into business together? But what would you say about producing a print calendar? Because I know how to do that. He already designed the calendar, so the hard work's done. I know how to get it into print and get it out to people. What do you say? And he was all for it. He was excited about it. So Ken and I worked together and produced the Ancient Dead Sea Scroll calendar in print form. And this is for this year. And it's absolutely beautifully printed. There are 8 different styles, 8 different versions of this calendar that people can get if they want to. But basically what you have is, I don't know if people can see that, but you have the Dead Sea Scroll calendar on the top with all the feast days and everything. And then on the bottom, you have the normal, just American, regular kind of calendar. Even if you get the square one, the square style, you even get like pictures for St. Patrick's Day and the holidays and stuff like that. So that is for this year. It starts in March, so don't think, well, it's 4 months into the year by now, there's no point in getting one. The Dead Sea Scroll calendar starts in March, so it's a great time to pick one up. But as I said, we also have several other options. We have 3 different poster versions, which are just, they're just posters. We have 3 different versions of that. We have a desk calendar style. So this is like if you have a family member or a friend or something that has a desk job or something, this is a great gift. And then we also have this little CD case version, which is, I thought this was pretty innovative and cool, but it just opens like a CD, but you can stand it on your desk like that, and then it's you just have cards. They come out as cards. There's the calendar on one side, and then there's the American holidays on the back side. And you just set it on your desk or wherever like that. So if people want that, there is a link in the description below. And by the time this episode airs, we should have the link right at dailyrenegade.com. So if you go to dailyrenegade.com right now, you should, if I'm timing this out right, you should see a graphic right on the page on the login screen. You don't have to be a member to take advantage of this, but we'll put it right on the login screen. DailyRenegade.com, you'll see a graphic there. You
Hey,
can click
Sean,
on that,
good to
pick
see
your
ya.
calendar, and we'll keep doing this every year. Or you can go to Dr. Ken Johnson's website, BibleFacts.org, or DSSCalendar.org, and you can see the same graphic there and get it there. Either way, it takes you to the same place, and your
purchase of a calendar goes both to help support Ken's ministry and Daily Renegade. So if you already know that you love us both and you want a calendar, that's the place to go. Okay, so we are going to take a break and we're going to pick this back up in the members only section. If you haven't had a chance yet, again, please go to dailyrenegade.com and get a membership today. If you get a monthly or yearly membership, you'll have full access to my newest book dealing with how Christians should look at the UFO disclosure movement that's been opening up more and more in our government today. It seems like every day now we're getting new news headlines on how the government is admitting to more and more and more. Well, how are we as Christians to respond to that? And what is this connection between UFO disclosure events and major events in Israel's history and geopolitics in the Middle East? Because things are heating up there too. And these two seemingly different things converge somehow. So the film gets into all that. Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Josh Peck. Tonight we welcome returning guest Carl Gallups to talk about his new book, The Summoning, Preparing for the Coming Days of Noah. Carl, welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Josh Peck, I'm doing great, man.
Okay, this is 2 years old, guys, so it's reasonably recent.
And thank you for having me. And as I said off air, and I'll tell you again, give your precious family my love. I miss being around you guys, but it's great to be on air with you right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to talk to you again. Always is, and of course, give the best to your family as well from us. This book is phenomenal, and you're welcome. And thank you for sending me an advanced copy of this. It's called The Summoning, as I mentioned before. Easily one of your best. Where did that title come from? The Summoning. Where did that title come from? What does it mean?
Yeah, actually, it came from Psalm 50, the first 6 verses. I don't have it right in front of me. I can paraphrase it, but basically it's where it speaks of the Lord God. In this, listen, I just want to say to your audience, and I know you know this because you've read the book or at least, deeply understand it. This book is about this time that we're living in. It makes sense of it. It tells you why it happened, where it's going, what we do in the midst of it, how we live this out. And it gives you the whole big biblical picture of what in the world is going on. And so the summoning, the title, as you just asked, comes from Psalm 50, the first 6 verses. And to paraphrase it, it says the Lord God sits in heaven. He summons the earth and everything under the earth. And to a lot of people and a lot of scholars, that speaks of the demonic outpouring of the last days, the abyss being open, the angel having the key to the abyss, and everything on earth and under the earth he summons to his throne. And the whole picture is for the day of judgment. The day of judgment is coming. But in the middle of that ominous warning is this, and then he says, I'm summoning the heavens, I'm summoning the earth, I'm summoning everything unto me for judgment. He says, however, listen to these words, gather my consecrated ones unto me, those who have made themselves pure by the sacrifice. Wow. Well, I mean, that's a lot of people see there. That's almost either a picture of the rapture and or just the gathering of God's people as we are separated out, the sheep from the goats, and this great judgment that's coming. So anyway, that's where it comes from. Now, I spent 10 years in Florida law enforcement, in 2 different sheriff's offices under 3 different sheriffs, and criminal investigations and patrol officer, and before being in the ministry, and I've been in the ministry about 35 years now, 34 years in one church as the pastor. So that word summoning, just really stuck in my mind. And as I was writing the book, God is summoning. It's a summons from the court, from the judge, from the Supreme Court, from the Chief Justice of the universe.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned 40 days and nights of rain, and throughout the book you talk about the days of Noah and the days of Lot. What do those phrases, days of Noah and days of Lot, mean prophetically?
Yeah, thank you. Well, here's the deal. In both cases, when Jesus spoke about that, he threw the little caveat in there, which a lot of people like to quote as though that's all Jesus meant. No. This is very important. Thank you for asking. He said it'll be like the days of Noah in that, and I'm paraphrasing, in that the people ate and drank, went to work, sowed their fields, given in marriage, and right up until the day the flood came, and then washed them all away. And the same with the days of Lot. They ate and they drank. They were given and taken in marriage. They went to the fields. They went to the markets. Right up until the day fire came from heaven. Now, a lot of times people look at that and they say, well, what's the big deal? There's nothing sinful about those activities. See, God's not pointing out the sin. Oh, yes, he is. The whole reason God pushed the reset button in the days of Noah, it starts in Genesis 6 and goes right on down. The wickedness that filled the land. And I write about all the details of that in the book. And the same thing with Lot, the wickedness that filled it. But in the middle, he had his people, Noah and his family, Lot and his family. But the point is, the characteristic was this. The reason Jesus throws the caveat in about eating and drinking and giving in marriage and going to work and going to the market and all this buying and selling, he's showing that the prevailing attitude of the planet in both of those situations was, everything goes on as usual. Maybe we'll get a new president next year. Maybe we can get a better Congress next year. It'll be fine. Everything's going to be good. By the way, we got work to do. We got this to do. And I tell Christians, look, you got to pay the bills. You got to mow the grass. You got to educate your children. You have to plan for the future. I'm not a date setter. You're not a date setter. You and I are not overly sensational. In other words, we are sensational because the Word of God's sensational.
Yeah.
And we're living in sensational times, but we don't. I know you don't, and I certainly don't either. We don't try to make more of it than what it is.
Right.
We just call it what it is. We examine it. We examine the various interpretations of it, and then we move forward and we watch. Well, that's what Jesus is saying. For those of us, Noah, what did he do and his family? Well, I'm sure they ate and drank. I'm sure they were given and taken in marriage. I'm sure they went to weddings in town and funerals and everything. They bought and sold. They went to the markets. Lot and his family had to do the same thing. So that's not a sign of condemnation on God's people, but it is a sign of condemnation on the unbelievers because they were so attached to the world, had their arms around the world, that they missed the prophets of God, Lot and Noah, who were saying, please don't do this, please don't do this, please repent. Noah had a ship the size of an aircraft carrier in his backyard. And he had 120 years he was preaching. And the people mocked him. They called him a conspiracy theorist. They said he was a nut until the day the rain started. And then it was too late. And that's what Jesus is saying. Same like Lot. They were trying to have, of all things, sex with angels. Well, that harkens back maybe to the days of Noah with that controversial passage, but you and I have written about it a lot. The sons of God came unto the daughters of men and had children by them. Well, if that means what it looks like it means, if that means what we think it means, if that means what a lot of scholars think it means, then there's...
If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a perverted giant.
Sex with angels or something really wicked happening there with the human race and the angelic race, the fallen ones. So that's the characteristics. And Jesus said it'd be just like that. So we look at the days we're in now. Technology's through the roof for the first time in history. Israel's back in the land for the first time in 2,800 years of prophecy. 72 years old, that's all. Jerusalem is now the capital again. That only happened under Trump just a couple of years ago. That was a huge prophecy that had to be fulfilled. 2,800-year-old prophecy. It's fulfilled. Technology, what's been done in secret is now being shouted from the rooftops. Rooftops. Signals from satellites, internet, antennas, everything you do is shouted to the
from the rooftops. Wow, that's a good pickup.
Everything on the internet, everything you say, it's gathered, information is gathered, and everything done in secret is now coming out. These are the times we're living in. The summoning is happening. The snapping occurred when 2020 turned the corner. We're now into 2021, and it's really ramping up, brother.
I have a lot more I want to ask you, but before we get to that, where can people pick up your book and follow you online?
Okay, the book is published by Defender Publishing, and it's available anywhere good books are sold. You can get them at the brick and mortar stores, big box stores. You can get them on Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes and Noble. You can get them from me personally. I will sign it, and if you're in the United States, I will send it to you free shipping. You won't get a better deal anywhere as far as price. So I'm not jacking the prices up. You can get package deals from me. You can get multiple books, and we'll do that. We can get bulk deals for you. You get them from Defender Publishing, the same thing. They've got bulk and package deals. So almost any way you want to do it. But the easiest way to start is to go to my website, carlgallups.com. And from there, it'll send you to Defender or Amazon or to me. I've got an email, a phone number there. You can get a hold of me, and we'll get you what you need. And plus, I've got sermons archived, and we live stream our worship services and everything. Everything at my name, carlgallups.com.
Fantastic. And we'll make sure that we put those links in the description below. A lot of opinions are split on this. Do you believe that the flood was a global, worldwide flood, or do you believe it was just a local kind of thing? And does it matter prophetically?
Yeah, you know what? Thank you for asking me that. I spend probably 5 or 6 chapters on this topic.
Hey, man, it's good to see you, bud.
Again, my chapter's only 5 pages each, so don't panic. People say, man, 5 40-page chapters? How thick is this book? No, I have 5 or 6 chapters, but it's filled with renowned scholarship, both ancient and modern. I mean, right into our day, and as well as I compare scripture to scripture and just science and archaeology. Here's the fact. Let me just lay this out. I'm like a lawyer. I'm building a case, and then I'll come to the closing argument.
Diane, that sounds like why they sent the naval fleet into the Middle East.
Bottom line is, there is evidence all over the world for something catastrophic that happened in our ancient past. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is indisputable. I mean, this comes from archaeological websites, from scientific websites. Now, they loathe to speak about the flood of the Bible. They hate that that's there because that means they might have to be accountable to the Word of God based upon what they're actually finding. So they've got all kinds of gyrations they go through to try to explain it away. And I deal with all this in the book, and I'm not going to bore your listeners with every detail now. But the bottom line is, you cannot deny the existence, not just of a few seashells and shark teeth on top of mountains. I'm talking about whole cliffs and walls and seabeds and miles, hundreds of miles of desert where there are shoals and reefs under the dirt, oyster shells that are as big as your desktop. I mean, it's unbelievable. The things that skeletons and piled up, animals and fish piled up in a pile, almost whole in the skeletons. All over the world, these things occur. On top of every mountain range, the highest mountains you can think of, there are things that ought to be on the ocean bottoms. And so, there are only a few possible explanations for this. And one of them is that everything you see used to be on the ocean bottoms and underwater. Well, the Bible says that. In fact, the book of Isaiah and the book of Psalms says it. I've got it quoted. And God's word said, now how could they have known this back then? That all over the world, on top of every mountain. But yet the word of God says that, yes, and in the days when the heavens were opened and the deep opened up its springs, that the mountains of the earth, when the waters receded, that they came up from the bottoms of the oceans. And I mean, even the Bible speaks of this cataclysmic shifting somehow. Our own geologists and scientists now speak of Pangea and the continental drift, and something amazing happened, Well, yeah. But just recently, and I quote these, there have been all kinds of National Geographic and Historical Channel and Science Channel and Discovery Channel in search of Noah's Ark. Was there really a flood? And I've got all this documented where the top scientists of the world, the top archaeologists say, yeah, in the Bible lands, there was a huge flood. And they talk about the cities and the villages and stuff that they're finding at the bottom of I think it's the Black Sea and some of these places over there, and then as they excavate down more along the Fertile Crescent and in the valleys in the riverbeds. They're finding all this stuff, and they're saying there's no doubt there was some cataclysmic flood in this area. And then they say, but that's probably what's described as the flood of Noah. You know, if that's not just a myth, or maybe that's where that myth came from, they would say. And then they start talking about, you know, but that would have been a local regional thing. Well, okay, but if the whole earth basically was populated in that area at the time, then to their world, the whole earth was flooded. I mean, everything that had breath died, okay, if that's the case. So, but the point is, and I show all of this in the book, I'm sorry, I just need to get to the overall point that the evidence appears that it was global. But there are some areas on the earth, there are archaeologically, where we have not discovered any sign of a flood in those areas. So that's what leads a lot of archaeologists to say, well, a lot of cataclysmic floods have occurred over the ages, but probably not a flood that covered the whole earth. Well, what I do with the book is I say, look, in the long run, now I want your listeners to hear me. This is not blasphemy. The scholars agree, science agrees, the Word of God agrees. I do the word studies to show you. It doesn't really matter if it truly was a flood that we think of that covers everything. In other words, there's a big ball of water floating around his face now. There's no land to be seen. If it was that or not, the point is, God said, I'm going to destroy everything that has breath, and I know where everything that has breath is living. Because here's the thing, I showed that there are what the scientists call flood stories, flood myths, several hundred of them all over the globe. They span the cultures, they span the languages, they span, and I mean, and not all of them are exactly identical to Genesis and the Noah, but a ton of them are. I mean, they speak of a man and his family who built a boat and got animals, and they came to rest on top of a mountain. Of course, the Hawaiian tale, it rested on a Hawaiian mountain, you know. But I forgot what his name is. I've got it in there. It's very similar to Noah and everything. And a rainbow appears. Of course, Hawaii's got a lot of rainbows, but you know, but that story is thousands of years old and all over the world. And I show that even the scientists agree. And so they try to explain that. I show one top scientist that just recently was on Discovery Channel or something. And he said, well, here's what happened. He said, these stories developed over time because people were having dreams and they were dreaming of a flood, but then they woke up and realized they just had to use the bathroom. I promise you, this was on TV recently, and all the scientists went, oh, that's so brilliant. Yes. Well, the reason it wasn't somebody had to urinate and the whole world was having pee-pee dreams. No.
They'll believe that, but they won't even consider the Bible.
That's my point. So I go into this deep word study of the words used, where, because I know some people are listening saying, but my Bible says everything over the face of the earth. I know, but actually I show the Bible study that it doesn't say the word earth is not there. It just says over the face. And so when you look at it, and even the word earth, there's two words that's used for earth, Adama and Eretz. And both of those are like we use the word earth. And it's all up to the context. In other words, I could say, man, that train came by me. I was out in the woods and I was camping and I felt the earth move. Well, did I really feel the whole earth move? No, but in my world I did.
Yeah.
Okay. Or I could say, you know, I fell down. That guy hit me so hard when I was playing football, son, I ate the earth. You know, well, really? You ate the earth? No, we're speaking of the soil or where we are. And so the Hebrew words do the very same thing. So it's very difficult. You have to go by context. And so the context at least says everywhere there was light and everywhere God wanted to, he covered it in water and killed everything except for Noah and the animals that God brought to the ark. That's another interesting thing we can talk about sometime. Noah didn't go get those animals. God brought them. He said, I know which ones I'm bringing. And people say, why would he do that? I think it has something to do when God said all flesh had become corrupt except for Noah and his family. And Noah, I'm going to bring the animals to you. I want you to preserve. I think God knows the DNA makeup of everything. It's his computer code. He invented it. So I think he chose the animals that were not corrupt.
Do you remember when the animals were walking around in circles about 6 months ago? Someone suggested that's how the animals were rounded up for Noah's Ark. They done that circle and God picked out the ones he wants to save on the ark.
And he chose the humans that were not corrupt. He put them on the ark and he preserved it. So anyway, nobody will, if they read all those chapters, I don't think anybody will think it's heresy. I mean, I go cover the whole gamut. And plus I say, and I want your audience to know this, I mean this, whenever I preach it or teach it, if I'm just preaching before an audience, I preach it was a literal global worldwide flood. In the English, it says that, but in the Hebrew, it doesn't have to mean that. But I want Christians to know you don't have to freak out if somehow science proves that it was not a literal ball of water floating around in space for a year and a half. It doesn't matter. There was a flood, and it destroyed everything that had breath except for Noah and the animals on the ark. Whatever was on the world at that time, and God knew where it was and how to take care of it. So anyway.
Yeah, definitely. I know we only have about 10 minutes left, but before we go, I wanted to ask you this, because I've always been interested in this, and this is something I've written about as well, and I think you and I have reached similar conclusions to this. What is your opinion on the fig tree generation, prophetically speaking?
Listen, thank you. And you're asking me such good questions. I appreciate it.
He does.
I love preaching and teaching this when I have time, and I don't have time to preach it all out, but it's in the book. And I've got everything referenced. I'm just going to get to the talking points. Some people are going to disagree because they've never heard it, or they're thinking, well, I don't think it means that. It does. And I'm not being arrogant. I'm just saying the word studies bear it out. The context to everything Jesus said before it and what he said after and what has happened and how it ties to Old Testament prophecies bears it out. And dozens of renowned scholars bear it out. When Jesus on the Olivet Discourse said to his disciples, they said, tell us the signs of the end. Right after he got all the way down to the abomination causes desolation and the times of tribulation and people being persecuted, he says, but immediately after the days of that tribulation, the Son of Man will call to his angels and they will gather his elect from the four corners of the earth. And then he says, learn the lesson of the fig tree. Well, just very quickly, the reason he said that and the reason his disciples understood it is because that morning on the way up, on the way to Jerusalem, he had cursed a fig tree. Now, that doesn't mean he cursed it out. He had called down a curse on it. And the fig tree, those Jews knew. I show in the scriptures, I've got about 20 scriptures in the Old Testament where Israel is called the fig tree.
Yeah.
And so he used the fig tree there to show that here he had come to Israel and there was no fruit on it. And so he put his judgment on it and the tree withered up and died. Now that night, he's sitting on the Mount of Olives answering their question about the last days. And he says, well, first, he said, I can tell you the very last days. Learn the lesson of that fig tree. When it blooms again, when it puts out its shoots and finally is bearing fruit to the world, that generation that sees that will not pass away until all of these things that I've just told you come to pass. Now, that's my short version, and I know some people watching are saying, oh, that's not the way I learned it. You've got that wrong. I promise you I don't. And I'm not trying to say I'm Mr. Smarty Pants. I'm not. I just know I've done deep word studies. I've tied together the parables, the Old Testament, the New Testament, what Jesus said. I've gone to renowned scholars all over the world, even modern scholars who say, yes, he was talking about the return of Israel. Now, that means Jesus used the return of Israel as the stopwatch. I'm wearing a stopwatch right now. As a stopwatch. 72 years have gone by. Now, I don't set dates. When people say, well, okay, so a generation is 70 or 80 years. Well, that's one definition of a generation. Another one is 100 years, because after 100 years, that whole generation's gone and another generation's there. Sometimes a generation is spoken of in the term of 40. I've been at my church like 40 years. Well, when I came there, 34, but let's just say 40. When I came there 40 years ago, there were little children that are now grown with grandkids of their own. I birthed them. I married the kids and then their kids. And then, you know, in the 40 years I've been there, I've watched 2 or 3 generations come through. So no one really knows. That's why Jesus said, it's not for you to know the day or the hour. He said, I'm just telling you, that generation that sees, right? You were not born in 1948. Neither was I. Yet, it is still our generation in which the fig tree has bloomed. We're watching it. We're living in it. When I was born in 1955, then that nation had only been around, 13 years. So, or 17 years, I think. So the point is that, but all my life, there it is. I've never known anything but Israel there. But it's a teeny small time that it's been there. And when it bloomed, the world watched it on black and white television. That was the technology of the day. On 3 major networks, if you could get your wife to go out and twist the antenna outside and pick up one of them, you might get one. And then the news you saw was about 3 days delayed because somebody had to go over there and take video. Then they had to fly back or get on a ship. Then they had to develop the film. Then they had to get it edited. Then they had to get it on TV. Then they had to hope that somebody's wife was around turning the thing so that people could see it. I mean, that was the technology of the day. In 72 short years, we went from that to what we're doing now. That's it, the fig tree. It's all about Israel. It's not about the United States. I keep trying to tell people that. It's not. Has God used us? Yes, but he used Babylon. He used Assyria. He used Persia. He used Rome. That's the empire he chose to bring his Christ into, and for the crucifixion, from birth to crucifixion. He used Rome. Does that mean that Rome was this wonderful blessing from God's throne and everybody there was godly? No. But he's used America, but it's not about America. It's about Israel. That's ground zero. I wrote the book, Gods of Ground Zero. It's all about Jerusalem and Israel, the Garden of Eden, Satan stealing it, God getting it back. That's why Jesus put his whole ministry of the last right in Jerusalem, preached there, spoke there, beaten there, crucified there, resurrected there, ascended from there, and coming back to there, putting his feet on the Mount of Olives. I mean, it's all about Jerusalem and Israel. And that time clock started 72 years ago. The fig tree bloomed. That's what that parable was about. And right after he told that parable, then he said, and also don't forget, it will be just like the days of Noah in that generation. Thus my book.
Amen. Yeah, definitely. There's so much more that we can
Okay,
talk
Phil.
about. But before we head out, could you give a word of encouragement and perspective?
I'll try and get Gabe to download that speaker app so I can watch you and Holly's interview.
For today's church.
Good night, bro.
I will, and I do that in the book too. I end it that way. Believe it or not, it's not all doom and gloom. And for the born again believers, not doom and gloom. In fact, there are several passages of scripture, and I end it with what I call a little prologue, and all it is scripture. You turn the page, it says prologue, and it's a scripture about 4 paragraphs, but it says, therefore, what do we say about these days? We should encourage each other with these words. We should take heart because these days are coming. And we've not been appointed to God's wrath. Lot lived in the midst of horrible tribulation. Noah lived in the midst of horrible tribulation, but they weren't appointed for God's wrath. When God pushed the button in Noah's day, he put them safely in the ark and lifted them above it. When he brought down fire from heaven, he sent angels into Sodom and Gomorrah, got Lot and his family and got them out. Then his wrath came. And what God did was he preserved his children in the midst of it. And watch this. Peter writes about that in 2 Peter. He uses those 2 examples. He says, if God knew how to take care of Noah in his day, because see, Peter just finished writing about the fire coming from heaven and the heaven burning up and melting, the elements melting with a roar. But then he says, but pray, speed the coming of that day. Well, why? Because I tell people the end of all things doesn't mean the end of life. It means the end of all this filth we're living in. All this corruption and wickedness and the stuff that gives us high blood pressure and heart attacks. It'll be gone. All things made new heaven, new earth. No more crying, no more pain, no more death, no more mourning, no more disease, no more pandemics. It's gone, and Jesus Christ rules, and we rule and reign with him, right? And so the Bible says, encourage each other with this. If you see the day drawing nigh, So I see what's going on in the world. I write about it, I preach it, I teach it. Now I'm trying to live it in faith. I'm not running from fear. I'm not going to let the spirit of fear overwhelm my life. I'm just going to keep going through every door that God opens. I'm going to preach the word. I'm going to encourage God's people, pay the bills, mow the grass. You don't know the day or the hour, and plan for the future. You don't need a retirement account if the Lord delays. You don't know. But keep your eyes on Jesus and know that we're living in prophetic times. Do not deny the faith. Do like Paul. Fight the fight, finish the race, keep the faith, because there is a new day coming.
All right, well, we do have a lot more to talk about with...
Okay, guys, one more and I'll hang up. Where'd he go?
Hi, how can I help you? I'll put you through now. Okay, I love you. Bye.
At least you got your super right. Start strong. Start with Spirit Super.
Well, about 7 months ago, talking about some engineered dialogue in the opening scene and how it was deleted from the movie and what it had to say was kind of interesting, sort of revealing, as you can see here. Talks about Eden, talks about blood, of course, of our Lord. That's a little strange. Doesn't sound like an alien movie, does it? Sounds kind of religious almost, right? Yeah, actually it is. It's related to the good book, believe it or not. It's related to a means of reading and interpreting the good book from a certain angle, not an angle of a believer, but rather someone who looks at it through a different lens. Someone who perhaps has Gnostic ideas, where they actually invert things. The snake was actually your friend. He's actually a good guy. That kind of idea. And the snake in this movie Prometheus happens to be the alien itself, called the Deacon. The Deacon here is supposedly where all life came from. Aliens creating all life. Does that sound kind of familiar, folks? Oh yeah, that sounds just like the History Channel's never-ending videos about aliens and mystery of star gods and divine encounters, or really are they aliens? I mean, this is literally their nonstop videos on the History Channel, of course, that they created the pyramids and all this stuff. This is what they claim, okay? But interestingly, as we see in this interview here from Michael, of course, Heiser, he shows how there's not 1 ounce of evidence of one line of cuneiform tablet, nothing to substantiate or back any of these ideas that have been perpetuated throughout all these years on, of course, the History Channel or in a lot of movies, by the way. Even the Alien movie franchise is basically sort of in a fictional way talking about it. But just to give you an example, I'll show you a clip here. This is from Ruslan's channel. And he's playing a clip from Michael. And let's just play this real quick. Let's see if we can get it in the right spot. Okay. So let's play this real quick.
Yep. This is his narrative. He has convinced millions of people this is the true history of life on this planet. But the reason that's demonstrably wrong is you can actually go look up online the term Anunnaki in all of the Mesopotamian texts that Sitchin cites. You will find that there isn't a single tablet that has the Anunnaki on Nibiru. You will find that Nibiru is actually described as Jupiter or Mercury or just a star, but no planet. Again, out in the outer reaches of the solar system, where Sitchin puts it. You'll never find the Anunnaki riding in craft anywhere. You won't find all of the core ideas, or many of the core ideas, that Sitchin has for his mythology.
So this is what they base all these historical History Channel episodes on, which is probably in the hundreds at this point, folks. Probably in the hundreds, with millions of views on a lot of them even. And he goes on and talks about something pretty funny up here, folks, where he was invited to one of these conferences to talk about this. And apparently they thought he was a believer in this stuff. and he wasn't. They didn't vet it whatsoever. And he basically does a number of speeches debunking the whole thing while he's there, and apparently they kicked him out. So he basically goes there and debunks everything they're talking about, basically debunks the entirety of the history.
I'm on a journey to discover the human story of gold, how it shapes us.
The History Channel, pretty much. And they kick him out of the place. This guy's a scholar. Okay, this guy's a scholar. Of course, he's no longer with us. I just think it's kind of funny that he did this. I got to give him creds for that, folks.
But he was wrong. I've gone on a number of radio shows and basically just put it this way. How easy would it be to show that Mike is wrong? All you need to do is produce one line of one tablet that has one of these specific claims that Sitchin makes in that source, and Mike would have to go away.
Right.
Mike is still here.
By saying Mike, he's talking about himself. So all they have to do is find one piece of line on any sort of archaeological find whatsoever that says even one of these points that they claim, and he would be debunked. But they have no proof. As a matter of fact, this guy even made a website saying Sitchin is wrong. And it's been around for many years, and he's not been debunked. So they haven't been able to debunk him. So basically, this guy has already pretty much debunked 3/4 of the videos almost on the History Channel. Well, not 3/4. I don't know. They got lots of videos on this channel. However many it is, 30%, 50%. It's pretty much every other video at least that they do this topic. Okay, pretty much every other video is literally this topic. And this guy's pretty much debunked them all in one, like that. Just all debunked. Every single one of them. And of course, the stuff is throughout the movies as well. Like I said, it's all throughout the Alien franchise movie.
Okay, it's starting to glare now. That means the camera's getting hot.
Series. It's all throughout. It's in the Matrix. The same concepts. Not. It's a little bit different presentation, but again, you remember the architect in the Matrix series, the guy with all the TVs around him? He's essentially supposed to be the Demiurge. The Demiurge is claimed to be the creator of the earth, but he's not a good guy. And of course, the good guy is the snake that trying to give us wisdom in that garden, of course, folks. Ironically, of course, the Demiurge looks like a snake or a dragon. That's kind of weird. It's almost like the devil's trying to switch places with God or something here, folks. It's almost like what it seems like is going on. And that's actually what's going on. I mean, and of course, so that what they're saying here is this is the true creator, a guy that literally has a ponytail and is red. It looks kind of like the devil there, folks. It's actually an alien. And of course, here's supposedly what the engineers, they took part of him and used it to create humans. So again, the architect in the Matrix is supposed to be the same. It's supposed to be the Demiurge or the creator of the earth, the architect of the earth. And so that's, you get kind of the idea. So you get this theme in a lot of movies, actually. And what they actually try to tie this into is these primordial gods of Greek mythology and stuff. So if you look at, like, I went through the kind of the Alien series and kind of encapsulated it here, folks. There's actually 8 movies. Alien 1979 popularized the term alien, that comes from the Latin alienus, that means foreigner. Aliens 1986 predicts that there are a ton of aliens coming and not just one. See, that's a lot of these themes. Like, are they trying to tell us that there's going to be, of course, in our future, these type of beings, aliens? Are they telling us through this movie series? That's another question. Could be very well the case. Aliens 1986 predicts. Oh no, I already said that one. Alien.
Remote took a while.
Alien 3, 1992, stylized specifically to represent the mathematical symbol of a cube. So to show us that these aliens are entering into our space, length, width, depth, 3D space, through their new bodies. It also represents sort of a trinity which is also depicted with the horse symbol. So this is kind of interesting because a lot of people talk about how, and I mentioned this before, the first crash was in 1946, right? Roswell. Right before that happened, there was a certain scientist that did something out in the desert, a certain, of course, ritual that opened up something, perhaps another dimension, and then maybe that's how they came through. That's what some are wondering, if that's what happened. Perhaps they're not from another planet, but actually from another, of course, dimension. Perhaps it's spiritual. You see what I'm getting at? So this is another aspect of it. Alien Resurrection, 1997, a complete reference to the resurrection of a certain particular person. Let's just say Gilgamesh. Heard of that guy, I'm sure. I've done videos on that. Entire movies about Sigourney Weaver or Ellen Ripley essentially becoming Ripley number 8. They bring her back to life. The number 8 symbolizes Ogdod, which is the 8 primordial deities of the Egyptian pantheon. The Egyptian pantheon, I think, is probably the most accurate for the Divine Council. The Divine Council talked about in Psalms, in the OT, which no one knows about. That Divine Council is a pantheon of gods. By gods, meaning they have supernatural powers, kind of like Marvel heroes, superheroes, and stuff like that. And they were given those powers, and they were supposed to be put over certain nations, and then they fell. And then now they were worshipped. Instead of doing their job, they were supposed to guide humanity in the right direction, but they became corrupt. And then they became these gods over these nations. And this is where we get all these gods from. Odin and all these other gods, and all these tales and myths. Comes from this. And so then you have Alien vs. Predator 2004. This predicts aliens will have a WAR against anyone who opposes them, even predators. This is kind of interesting. So could there be a WAR in our future with these type of beings? So some are saying maybe this is what it's saying in this movie series. I don't know. You have Aliens vs. Predator Requiem 2007. And then you have Prometheus 2012. And I've already went over some of that, which has to do with the Greek god Prometheus, the god of fire, the light bearer, sort of kind of like the term Lucifer, right? In the plot, 2 archaeologists, Elizabeth Shaw and Charlie Holloway, discover a star map in Scotland that matches others from several unconnected ancient cultures. They interpret this as an invitation from humanity's ancient, of course, aliens. So that's the whole. So instead of it being this nice creator creating us, they say, no, he's not nice. And actually, we created you over here. See what I mean? We're the good guys, not him. This is kind of the theme. And Alien Covenant, this is a sequel to Prometheus. In the prologue, a business magnate, Peter Whalen, speaks with his newly activated AI android in Lakeside apartment. After looking at Michelangelo's statue of King David, the android chooses the name David for himself, showing typology with King David, who's a warrior king. So it is interesting. So there is a lot of things tied to the good book here, and it's clearly intent.
With the most experience in the cloud, imagine how AWS can transform your business.
Clearly intentional. It's clearly intentional. So, at any rate, I think you get kind of the idea with that. That's kind of some of the stuff represented, but I went a little bit a different realm, a little bit with this video than I did my other one. But I'm going to get into a number of other things here in a minute. First, I got to mention we got a giveaway going on, folks, right now. Highly recommend you do this. It costs you nothing, folks, and it's very easy. Just pause the video. Take you less than 30 seconds probably if you got autofill. All you do is put your email and name in, which if you have autofill, you just literally click a button and it's already done. And then all you do is just click a couple buttons and you'll have probably 2 or 3 pop-ups. Hit follow or subscribe with my other social media and you'll pretty much have a ton of entries. And at this point, you have a very good chance of winning, folks. Usually, I mean, in the past, it's only been like 5,000 people will join or 4,000. I mean, honestly, you have a very good chance of winning. Easily 1 in 1,000 or better, probably. If you do all of these things listed below, because most people won't even do half these things. So if you do them all, and it's pretty fast to do them all, you'll easily have lots of entries and have a much better chance of winning. And you can also follow me on our social media as well in the process. And very easily could win $1,500 worth of gold and silver, or a laptop, $400 or $500 laptop, Acer, Aspire 5, or food supply. All right, so link below. Also, of course, obviously not everybody's going to win, so I highly recommend you still buy some food supply. 2 weeks worth for $127, or 3 months worth for $597. This is the one I'm actually giving away right here. Retail $797. Link is in the description. Of course, this book here, The Lost Ways, How Your Great-Grandfather Lived Without Electricity, How to Build a Cellar, Did Things Around the House Like they did in the old days. Hundreds of pages illustrated. Definitely want to check that out. Link is in the description, folks. Get the printed version, $30-some. Let's get into some other stuff here. Of course, my website, check it out. Got lots of awesome stuff over here. I put one of my episodes that's in the membership section for free over on the front page. You can completely check it out for free, folks. It's over an hour long. It's talking about Gilgamesh. Link is in the description for that as well. But I was talking about something. I just did a video right before this one about Pope Sixtus III. Of course, I've talked about him before. I'm sure you guys have watched videos about that. But we found some new information about the guy. Oh, yeah. Some real juicy information. Oh, my goodness, man. This guy is one of the worst. Okay? And you can't find this information, by the way, very easily on the internet. You have to pull out those old dusty books off a bookshelf to find this type of information. It's from a number of these books that talk about the history of popes and things like that, where they give you a lot of these interesting details. Perhaps some of the stuff was found from archives in the Vatican, books in the Vatican archives, or perhaps just stuff that was from other historical records. Absolutely astonishing. You want to check this video out. This guy was corrupt beyond corrupt, folks. And again, his name, the number Sixtus in Latin means 6 in English, the third, 6 to the third, Pope 666. And it says it's a name. If you look at the good book, it says the number is referring to a person. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast. So this guy was the beast, if I understand correctly. It is a man. And you won't believe what he did, folks. You're just not going to believe it. You want to go check it out. It's over on my website, GR Videos. In the membership section, $4.95 a month. First month is free.
This Christmas at Woolworths, get $15 off your first direct-to-boot shop.
Free. You can go check. If you've never signed up, you can go sign up for free, folks, and watch the video and just cancel if you don't want to stay around. But I mean, there's a lot of awesome videos. I even got some of my old videos from 2015, 2016 up there. Timeless, really good stuff. You're going to definitely want to check it out, folks. This guy fits the beast name. This guy fits it. This guy is like one of the worst. Yeah, I can't even talk about it on this. I can't even talk about it on YouTube because it's so ridiculous. Okay. I mean, let's see. Is there anything I can say about it? He treated the nuns like they were his wives. Let's just put it that way. And he did far worse than that, by the way. That was just one of the things he did. He literally treated the nuns, like all of them, as his wives. Like, if you understand what I'm getting at. And that was like not the worst thing he did. Not even close. That's just one of them. Okay, that's just one example. And his argument is pretty clever. Okay, it's really, it's obviously not correct, but it's clever. He's saying that he's representing the King of Kings on earth, and he's not here right now. So, and they're the bride. So, you know, technically the church is the bride, right? So I can do whatever I want, right? But that was not even close to all of it. There's way more.
Okay, guys, I'm out. The camera's glaring, which means it's overheated. So I'm going to hang up. See you tomorrow, guys. God bless.